All right, you guys. So, welcome back to the show. I have a great guest today. I've actually been following him for a little while. Kyle Kingsbury, and I found him on the Paul Check podcast. And I'm just happy to have him on the show. Honestly, I emailed you. I didn't even think you were going to reply. So, I'm happy that we're even talking here, which proves that, hey, if you don't even try, you're already failed anyways. So, thank you. I know you're busy and you're doing a lot of huge transitions. So, I'm really kind of grateful that you took your time to do this. And I feel like you have like a great message. And the theme of this year that I'm doing on a lot of podcasts is uh, talking about why it's so hard for people to create lasting change. Meaning, like sometimes, they lose weight just to regain it. Sometimes they solve a health issue just for another health issue to pop up or the same health issue to pop up. And you see these cycles like over and over and over again. And you just rarely see anyone creating kind of lasting change and becoming a true like mentally and physically healthy human being anymore. And I feel like one of the biggest contribute there are many contributors, of course, but one of the biggest contributors to the problem is the fact that, like, for example, with weight challenges, the people continue to stay in the same environment after their transformation as they were even before, which in my opinion kind of like, and from my observation, I've been doing a fat loss coaching for 15 years already, just increases the chances of relapse 90+% within a 3 to 4 year period. And I would say in a long enough time frame, if a person continues to stay in the same environment that they were in before they started the fat loss transformation, it's almost 100% that they're going to regain their weight. So a good example, and a good extreme example, let's say you have a person that finished a successful drug rehab program. You don't need to be a master psychologist to understand that if a person goes back to the exact neighborhood where the drug dealer is there and their kind of drug addict like former friends are there, the chances of them actually getting back into drugs is almost 100%. Okay. And I feel like you have a great story because, like I told you, I grew up off grid by my grandmother. And I feel especially with parents, as you probably already know, your kids learn from what they see you doing mostly, not necessarily what you tell them to do, which is a small percent of the whole entire learning process. So I feel like personally, if I didn't grow up that way with my grandmother teaching about biodynamic principles and just naturally living, as Paul Chek would say, the four doctors you'll ever need just by default in that environment, and I didn't have that contrast, I would probably be pretty much lost with my health if I relied on just the Americans' perspective, or Western perspective of healthcare in general, which is heavily focused on symptom management, just numbing out pain, and basically just getting you to continue to fit into the matrix. It's like, oh, you got anxiety? Okay, let's get you on some of these drugs so you're not so anxious at work, so you can fit in more, so you can get that promotion. You got this? Okay, let's throw these medications at you so you can continue to contribute to the matrix, continue to be in the machine, etc. But very few times do people say like, hey, wouldn't it be easier if society has become like basically a swamp of mental and physical pathology, just to step out of the swamp instead of learning how to exist in the swamp, which might actually become very complicated. Like, for example, there are many health professionals, and a lot of them are actually very, very smart. And they're very good at tinkering, like what needs to be changed, et cetera, to continue to live in the swamp. But my thinking is like, and I learned this from my grandmother, which was basically, and I mean this in the best way, very, very healthy, but also just, she was illiterate. She basically never learned how to read, but still much healthier than a lot of these guru health professionals, And I think the one thing that's kind of holding them back and holding a lot of people back is they continue to want to live in this swamp instead of just step outside of the swamp, and then mental and physical health, it's not going to be given to you, but it becomes very easy to achieve at that point. So I would like to have you take over at this point and start from the beginning, start where you began this journey and what kind of led you to want to kind of slowly distance yourself from society, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, thank you. Agree with everything you're saying, brother. I did not start out on a farm. I started out with, the standard American diet. I had processed carbohydrates with every meal, loads of gluten, at least in the early 80s. I think it had less glyphosate and things like that in it. So I didn't get too fucked up. But yeah, I'd get sick all the time. Probably would run 6 or 7 courses of antibiotics a year for a decade at least through my teens. And still wasn't, I started with football when I was 10 years old, and it was really just about gaining weight. I was kind of undersized for the position I played at defensive line. And, got into weightlifting, got into, if it fits your macros, stuff like that. Like, how do I gain weight and then keep it and those kind of things. And that's where, fitness, I guess you would say, started out for me just to be a better athlete. And then when I finished at Arizona State, had a pretty serious bout of depression from a lot of childhood stuff, but mainly just from, I look back, all the wrong drugs. So the number one party school in the nation, was doing coke on the weekends, drinking loads of alcohol, eating like dog shit. To support my weight, I'd throw down like 3 McDonald's breakfasts a week. I'd have a couple Freshetta's pizzas and go to Krispy Kreme after and chase a dozen donuts with a pint of heavy cream, processed heavy cream, not the good stuff. And, lack of sleep, all the things that I would later find out about, like all of that concert of shit, if you will, really put me in a bad place. And I had a doctor that would give me anything. You've got anxiety. I'd have 10 milligram Valium and 2 milligram Xanax, 60 counts in my closet at all times. It was like, well, you only need one or the other, really. And why do you need the maximum dose of both? So that wasn't a good thing either, but it allowed me to walk the walk with Western medicine and see, like, is this the best they can offer? And therapy and all that stuff too, but it never really scratched the surface. And then I got into mixed martial arts a couple of years later, just to continue to push myself as an athlete. I sat the bench at ASU and didn't feel like I was done yet. And MMA for me was such a stark contrast to football. I couldn't go out and party on the weekends and have endurance the entire next week. It'd be a 2-week setback minimum if I stayed out all night partying. So it was like the first time in my life where I actually had to really take care of myself on a physical level just in order to stay with the program of training, twice a day, 6 days a week. And thankfully I had a boxing coach that I met up with at American Kickboxing Academy who recently passed away, but he was a Native American and a Mayan elder and mestizo Mexican man, just an awesome, awesome dude who would bring me out for traditional sweat lodges at a Native American reservation. And from there, we started working with plant medicines. And really that started to expand consciousness in a way where, fighting became less important to me. It was not the most important thing in the world. But what I had gained from fighting along the way was a passion to learn again. I was one of the people that was like, I'm never going to read again. I'm done with college. I'm not picking up another book. And I had a strength coach also along the way who, he started poking fun at me. He's like, you fought a lot. And I was like, I fart a lot? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, that's a weird thing to say to a dude. Like, all dudes fart, protein powder, whatever. He's like, no, you got to gut it. You got some kind of intolerance. And he asked me to read How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy. And I was like, no, man, I'm not fucking reading books. I'm punching people. I don't need to read anything. And he goes, well, would you watch a movie? And I was like, yeah, I'll watch a video of this guy. And so he put on the Flatten Your Abs Forever video from Paul Chek on VHS. I was like, dope, man. I want to be shredded. Like, it was all aesthetic. And like 30 minutes in, I'm like, this has nothing to do with flattening your abs. It has everything to do with gut health, soil health. Really the 4 principles: Dr. Diet, Dr. Movement, Dr. Quiet, and Dr. Happiness. And getting into that, I had never understood, because I had never given myself a long enough stretch of eating healthy, what that would look like or what that would feel like. And it really was always around aesthetics. Like, am I lean enough? Am I not lean enough? It had nothing to do with, like, am I putting only healthy things in my body? Am I going to bed on time? Am I meditating or doing breath work? Something to clear all the fucking mental stress of the day. And when I started applying that for a month, I did an elimination diet and started applying all that. And then I slowly started adding things back in. Gluten was the thing that was giving me gas. Dairy was making my nose run, making me allergenic to seasonal allergies. It became so concrete because it was a visceral experience. It was absolutely undeniable. And the beautiful thing about that is that set me off on a journey of discovering and working with Paul Chek, but also that planted the seed for me to want to learn everything else. That was the thing. Like, because that was the first thread that I took, I understood immediately that I could educate myself now with the things I'm passionate about And in doing so, it would have a profound impact on my day-to-day life in the cage and outside of it, not just for fighting, but my general sense of well-being would be improved. And that was more of an antidepressant than fucking anything I've ever taken from Big Pharma. And
Mhm.
so that really set me on the journey of wanting to learn more. I fought, I had my ups and downs. I think I finished 11-6 with one no contest. So, but my thing was, if I ever got to be a 500 fighter, meaning, even wins, even losses, I'd make the decision if I was going to retire or not. So I had rushed up against that in 2012, had a pretty serious shoulder injury. That's when I went to do HLC level 1 out in San Francisco with Paul's wife, Angie. And I had all this data, all this information. I was like, this is awesome. This is things that'll help me in fighting. But I also knew I'm not going to keep going if I lose again. And I had been introduced at that point to plant medicines and really had started expanding, my desire, my desire to focus on other areas and continue to improve myself. And had one last fight, got my ass kicked, and I was like, all right, I'm good. And from there, I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew I still had a passion for learning. And that's what the medicine kept showing me. Like, just follow the fucking thing that you're into. It will pay, which is the complete opposite of how people tell you to work. Do the thing that's secure, do the thing with the 401k and the medical and dental, and have a secure thing for your family, even though that doesn't even exist anymore. At the time, thankfully, I was gifted that information from ayahuasca specifically. And it was like, cool, I'm just going to keep reading. I was working at a strip club, bouncing and bartending the entire time I was fighting in the UFC. Didn't make much money at all doing that. And eventually went on Joe Rogan's podcast from fighting. We talked all sorts of cool things, how to heal the brain from TBI and plant medicines, fasting, you name it. And he's told me to start a podcast. So I did. And that led me to Paleo Effects, where I wanted to meet a lot of the people I wanted on the show. And I ended up meeting Aubrey Marcus. We shared the same flight back to Vegas. They were looking at opening a second Onnit gym there. And we did the same thing. We traded war stories for 3 hours. And he's like, I'm going to make you position at Onnit. I want you to come run on the Onnit podcast and help me design supplements. So I moved out to Austin about 5 years ago and have been doing that with him. When he stepped down as CEO, I stepped down. I didn't like the corporate feel without just one dude to answer to. And we've been working together in Fit for Service, which is something he started as coaches, where we really bring our lifetime's worth of experience to people in the most transformative way. So, holotropic breath work, different experiences that really, in a legal way, put you in an altered state of consciousness that can start to shift you and get you to see outside the box and just step briefly outside of the swamp. So you can see, like, there is something different here. How do I re-enter this space now intentionally and start to curate that so my normal waking consciousness is one in which I'm in alignment with everything that I'm calling in. And that's been our mission, for the last 4 years. We're in year 4 now. I still run the podcast as the Kyle Kingsbury podcast, formerly the Onnit podcast, but that's all mine now. And as in podcasting, that's one of the easiest ways to continue your education, because anybody I'm tracking, from authors to different speakers that has something of value, I want them on first, and I'm going to ask them all the questions that I want to know. Like, fuck the audience. I love my audience, but like, you'll benefit from this too.
Yeah.
I'm not asking questions that anybody else. I'm asking super specific shit just for me to benefit from. And if that translates, great. But there is like a degree of selfishness there. And it does translate. The podcast has done very well. We were top 10 in health and fitness 2 out of the last 5 years. And like, it's continually one of the things that's most refreshing for me, because, as you know, like, it's a new conversation, and it's a real conversation. And that's one of the ways I scratch the itch of learning.
Yeah, very cool. Well, let's go into kind of your background, but what got you thinking about, like, wanting to start your own ranch and kind of move further away from the city? Because I feel like, once again, like I mentioned in the beginning, that's a huge obstacle, only because I hate to say it, but pathology has been normalized in our culture these days. So one study, for example, I'm referencing is the prevalence of optimal metabolic health. You can find this on PubMed.gov in American adults. And like I mentioned to you in our previous show together, 9 out of 10 American adults these days are metabolically unhealthy, because I feel like a lot of people will listen to this podcast and they're like, oh, I'm fine, just because the standards have dropped so low. Like they
Yeah.
might actually be fine compared to those super shitty low standards. And of course, like sometimes when I was doing grocery store tours for my second book and I was teaching people about the labeling practices and where to source food, occasionally I'll get a person that comes up to me and they're like, well, I've been eating this factory farm stuff for my whole life and I'm just fine. I'm the healthiest person in my office. Meanwhile, they're like 25, 30 pounds overweight. They're on 2 pharmaceutical drugs. They have crazy knee pain or low back pain. And to them, that is genuinely fine because compared to the guy next to him in the office, which is basically a train wreck, he is doing great. And I feel like that's one thing that keeps people kind of sucked into this swamp thinking it's okay, and keeps them in this loop of just chasing symptoms, getting sicker, and saying, like, well, this is normal because it is normal, but that doesn't mean it's right and optimal. I don't know what you're
Yeah,
thinking.
yeah, no, this is great. I think, what's coming up for me is that it's the same thing I thought, right? Around food was like, all right, food can help me lose weight. Food can get me the six pack that I need. It's not just cardio and working out. It's what I'm putting in my body that'll help me get the six pack. The the juice is not the aesthetics though. The juice is that fucking your the way you think, feel, and operate, how you handle stress, anxiety, your baseline levels, of glutamate shift. Like all of these things shift when you start putting the right things into your body and going to bed on time. And what that does for you is way more than you can imagine. It's unimaginable when you're coming from a standard American diet. I had no fucking clue how I would feel. And if somebody told me, hey, if you start eating this way and sleeping this way and doing these things for yourself, and by the way, eating this way means eating what's appropriate for you. Everyone's different, right? Everyone's microbiome is different. The all of the medicine we received as kids is different, and that all impacts how we take in things. But point being, when you start to learn and work with your body, and in that listening, you start to give it what it wants and needs. The benefits go far beyond anything you can think of because it's fundamentally going to change your life. And that's a weird thing for people who haven't experienced that to be like, it's bullshit, but it's like, no, it's 100% true. Like I haven't even had a stint of depression since I quit alcohol and eating like shit. It just doesn't come around. I can have hard days. I can have really hard, challenging moments, and months long. I've done some crazy stuff with my wife that really put us under a lot of stress and pressure, but depression didn't come in because I was putting the right foods in my body. And I think for people, another good example on this is pain. I've had every injury known to man from starting football at 10 years old and fighting in the UFC for 6 years. My eye's been busted twice, orbital fracture. My eyebrow is broken. My jaw is broken in 2 places. I've torn my right labrum, which is a gnarly surgery to get fixed. Both knees are bone on bone. I've ripped meniscus over and over again. It doesn't exist anymore. And I don't have pain. I can squat 300-400 pounds for reps. I don't have pain in my knees. I don't have pain in my lower back. None of that's there because systemically my inflammation is so low. Inflammation, you could look at like volume on your stereo. You turn that up, pain goes up with it. Pain goes up. And a lot of people have been walking around for 20, 30 years with low level pain that if something acts up, they're like, it's just my bum knee, or it's just this scoliosis, or it's just this thing that I've had for so long. And they don't understand that the lifestyle is what's perpetuating that. That's a big leap for most people. And I think understanding like one of my favorite quotes is from Wim Hof, and he says, feeling is believing. And don't take my word for it. Try it. Go in the deep end. Go balls deep and experience it for yourself, and then make the grade. Don't say you tried intermittent fasting for 3 days and it didn't work. You did it for 3 days. like give it an honest run and then see how you feel and report on that feeling, because that's really what is going to be the thing that gets you to create and keep the change. Is if you can learn to make good things convenient and enjoyable, right? If you hate lifting weights, but you love running, fucking run. And if you love running so much, you want to be the best runner, I should lift weights. That's going to help me stay injury free and help with some of the repetitive stress injury, right? Like you could say, this is going to make me better at the thing that I love, and that's why I do it. But point being, we have to figure out for each of us what that thing is. What is the thing that I will be consistent with? What is the thing that I can wake up and say, yeah, I want to do that today? And it's not, I have to do that. Like, I don't have to go to the gym. I need it. I love going to the gym. And if I don't go twice a week, at least twice a week, I'm not myself. I'm a little bit more irritable with my kids. My pain actually goes up when I'm not working out. If I miss squat day, I start to get back pain. Like, my body wants that thing. It wants that stress in order to move everything around and get into these deeper positions. And I think most people have no idea about that. They've been so far removed from it for such a long period of time that it's no longer in the zeitgeist of possibility.
Yeah, and I feel like that's one of the huge problems because let's say for us, we coincidentally ran into the right people. Like you're a coach, like my grandmother. You coincidentally ran into Aubrey Marcus, which maybe connected you to more health conscious people or other people in that network, et cetera, et cetera. And I just feel a lot of people, like the average American, for example, doesn't have that. Like, what does the average American do? Let's say they're getting sick. What do they have in their mind? Well, the health experts are like the medical community, pharmaceutical community. Some of them may go do some kind of like boot camp, or something like that. Or some of them may do like 10,000 steps. And I did that. So I'm like very healthy and optimizing my health because they just don't have the large amount of education and exposure we do. It's not their fault. It's just, they just coincidentally grew up a different way. So I feel like just the way, especially in America, healthcare has become like very symptom management, it also just misleads the general population. It kind of sells them false promises, like you mentioned, like I had growing up in early college and high school, I had social anxiety, clinical levels combined with generalized anxiety. And I went to the doctor, and I'm like, well, I have this anxiety, for example. And he's like, well, yeah, take this anxiety medication. Literally 2-minute chat. He's like, we'll put you on this. And because of the way I grew up, I didn't even know why, but instinctually deep down inside, I knew there was something wrong with that approach. And I'm like, well, wait, let me try to maybe get rid of a few of my type A personalities or manage them differently, maybe stop working so much.
Meditate.
Also start eating a little bit better. I took improv classes to overcome the social anxiety, acting classes. I even hired a dance coach as well. Of course, it took time and it actually caused more anxiety in the beginning, ironically, doing those things. But over time, I was able to train myself and habituate to that and just not take the pharmaceutical route whatsoever. But I just feel a lot of people that are even looking for the right answers, they're being sold these false promises, like you have a rock stuck inside. Like, imagine if we were walking and you had a rock stuck inside your shoe and it's causing you pain. And instead of taking the rock out, I was like, well, Kyle, don't worry about it. Just take these painkillers. Like, how stupid would I sound? But that's how the medical community outside of emergency medicine, I love those guys. I'm not putting them on this spotlight, but that's just basically how the medical community is operating these days. You got a rock stuck inside your shoe, don't take it out. Here, just take these painkillers. Now replace the rock with anxiety, depression, low back pain, whatever, insomnia, anger issues, a list of myriad of symptoms. I don't know. What's your take on that?
Yeah, it's tough. I think I heard, Bruce Lipton, Dr. Bruce Lipton, who wrote The Biology of Belief, and he's featured on a lot of the Gaia shows. He's a fantastic guy. One of the things he said is, from the moment we're born, we see the expert. It's not our dad that pulls us out of the womb. It's some dude in a white lab coat, right? Or a lady in a white lab coat. And we're not placed on our mother's breast. We're cleaned and scrubbed, and then we're placed on mom's breast, if we're lucky. And anytime we get sick, they say, don't worry, we're going to go see the doctor, right? So like, you're constantly inundated with, this is the guy I go to who's going to fix me, over and over again. It's like the difference between, like, in my old man's era, all they did was work on cars. They had classic cars, muscle cars, trucks, things like that. And that's what they did on the weekends. They grab a 20-pack and they just fumble around and install one new part, and they learn about how it worked. And that's what they do. If they needed to change the oil, they do it themselves. Now, I got to drive somewhere, right? I don't know shit about my car. Like, that's just what I do because that's what I have money for that, and they take care of it, and it's one less thing for me to worry about. But I don't understand that vehicle. Now, the difference between a car and our bodies is that this is the only vehicle we get this lifetime, right? So we have to take good care of it. And if we're constantly outsourcing that to the mechanic whose sole job is to keep you coming back, like, that's not a good thing. Now, I know most MDs do not want to keep seeing people for the same issues. I can guarantee that. A lot of my family members are medical doctors. But it's like the old saying, if all you have are hammers, everything begins to look like a nail. Everything in their kitchen sink is pharmaceutical medicine. There's nothing on the side of preventative medicine. And most of the doctors are fat and sick and don't know their own health, right? Mm-hmm. They say, oh, my blood work looks fine, but they're 30, 40 pounds overweight. And because they had been smashed with so much education for so long, they too were not taking time out of their day to continue their education and learn new things. Very few are like Dr. Nathan Riley, who is Paul Chek's OBGYN. He's been on my podcast. Very few are like that. Incredibly small, like a sliver of a sliver. Mm-hmm. And I think, people really don't know, but one of the things, this as a coach, the number one prerequisite is you got to want it for yourself. And that sounds so fucking cliche, but it's absolutely true. If you want it because your doctor told you to, or your girlfriend says you should lose 20 pounds, or you're single now and you need to get your body back, those are not the same things as having a genuine desire to heal and be the best version of yourself. That's a completely different thing, right? And then, as you have been coaching people, like, if it's for some reason other than an authentic reason for your own change, that doesn't last. It'll never last. And if you don't have that desire, you're not going to look outside the box. You're going to keep going to the doctor and doing the same thing and taking pain pills for the rock in your shoe. But if you do have that desire, we're in a great spot right now. We've got podcasts, even people shit on Rogan sometimes for being a bro. He's had some of the best MDs and scientists I've ever heard of. He's had guys from Graham Hancock to Rupert Sheldrake to Dr. Peter Attia, Dominic D'Agostino, people that I've really learned a lot from. And I could just listen direct, peer-to-peer, direct to my phone. And I think, for most what you'd call the general population, yeah, they're still in the matrix, but this is available now. And it's such a broad, wide-reaching thing. I've got, as I'm sure you do, there's people that reach out to me from all over the fucking world to listen to the podcast. That's a really, really cool thing. And each of them came with the same reason. They had a genuine reason to start thinking outside the box. It might have been a health issue. One of my favorite quotes from Paul is, sooner or later, your number one concern will be your health. Sooner or later. You either make it that way now or on your deathbed. But at some point in time, it becomes number one. It always becomes number one. And so if we can actively say yes to that, number one, the authentic change, and then what you did, which was improv and dance classes, and they say you say yes to the challenge. Don't shy away from the challenge. The bullet pill doesn't solve anything. There's no multivitamin that works to offset your shit diet. There's no nootropic that's going to pull you out of a bad night's sleep and poor sleeping habits. When we get that and we say, shit, that means I have less time for myself because my kids and my wife and all this and all the work that I have to do. It's less time for myself to dilly around on my phone, but it's more time for myself if I'm giving it that to sleep. Like, I'm in bed at 8:30 after my son goes down. I'll listen to Audible, maybe watch a video, and then I'm out. 9:30, I'm out, right? Most of the time I'm out at 9, right? That's early bedtime for many people that are in their 40s. And do I lose a couple hours of Netflix or snuggle time? Yeah, I lose that. But what I gain is my body. I gain my mind. I gain my emotional awareness. I gain so much more by contributing to that. That's saying yes to the challenging piece. That is, for most people, going to bed on time and having quality sleep hygiene, that's harder than doing stand-up. Because they think they're losing something. I'm going to lose X, Y, and Z if I do that. They don't realize what's waiting for them in the gains department. So when the desire to change is genuine, you will start to think outside of the box. And that will ultimately bring up the question, am I willing to do this hard thing? And if the answer is yes, the more times you say yes to the challenging thing, that has compounding interest on top. If I'm consistent in the sauna, all the studies on earth from Rhonda Patrick, she's regurgitating around sauna health, 60% drop in all-cause mortality. If you're in the sauna 5 days a week, 5 to 7 days, 60% all cause, fucking you name it. Death by car accident drops. Like everything drops if you're in the sauna. All cause mortality drops 60%. That's remarkable. It's a sauna. Like it's
Is the
not.
same thing? Does the same thing work with a steam room or?
I think so because it's heat shock proteins, and I imagine as WIM and more of the cold studies come out that we'll see something similar there. I think the temperature variation, and if you trace what our ancestors did to now. I had Dr. Will Tagle on my podcast, who's the Texas native. He recently passed away. Brilliant guy, author of 8 books, 2 PhDs, a medicine man in his own right. He said they didn't get air conditioning in Texas till like 1966 or 1968. If you've ever been to Texas in the summer,
Yeah, man. It's
a fucking gnarly thing.
You're ready for like a sauna inside your house.
People were going to work. They had buildings then. People were going to work indoors in buildings with no air conditioning in the 60s.
Probably a suit too, because they all got dressed up to go to work back then.
Exactly. Like think about that, man. But also think like, all right, that would have been a huge pain in the ass. Is it convenient to have the air conditioning on? Yeah, I got my house at 73 right now for the podcast, and then I'll put it back up to 75. Yes, I do prefer that, but I can't spend my whole life here in this comfort. I have to get outside of that. And as you know, from being a weightlifter, the greater the stressor within reason, right? Otherwise you don't want it to break you, but the greater the stressor that you can take, the faster the physiological adaptation, right? So if I do a cold shower and it's 60 degrees, it's not going to have the same effect as going into a 35-degree ice bath. It's just not. If I get in a sauna, like a infrared sauna, which they're good, but it's like 145 to 160 versus a Finnish hot rock sauna that's at 212, it's not the same thing. The amount of heat shock proteins I produce, the amount of detoxing and flushing that I get, they're different, right? And so, I can work out with the bar every day and I can gain some strength, but it takes me adding weight and changing some of the dynamic stressors that are going to actually continue the change to take place. And every time I add weight, what is that doing? It's increasing the challenge. And you say yes to that as a weightlifter. In the sauna, you might say, I'm good for 10 minutes and I can't stand, minutes 11 through 15. But when you make it to 15, you're like, there's juice there. There's something beneficial there to go 15 minutes. And if I can make it to 20, there's something beneficial before I get in the ice bath and reset the thing. So I think it's teaching ourselves to lean in to the challenging parts that make everything else easier. Like if I can calm my breath inside of the first 10 seconds in an ice bath and I can just stay in a Zen state, like I find my center and just everything's nice and slow. And my body knows if I'm here long enough, I'm dead. Like that's what the body thinks when you get into 32-degree water. If I'm here long enough, I die or I lose fingers and toes. But intermittently in the right dose, I come out of that thing. How much easier is it for me if some guy cuts me off in traffic? First, I've had neurochemistry shifts from the cold extreme, right? I feel better immediately, dopamine release, all these things. So that already presets my mood a little bit higher. But if you can handle the stress of these things that you say yes to, then when the curveball comes from life, which inevitably always comes for all of us, it's a little bit easier to manage because you've actively said yes to challenges. So now when the unexpected comes up, you're like, cool, let's roll with that punch and keep moving.
Yeah, that's funny when you mentioned that, like, getting to that 15 minutes, then you can push it to 20 minutes in the sauna. Whenever I try to do 20 or 25 minutes in the steam room or sauna, the girlfriend would always be like, oh my God, you're going to die and develop cancer. That's instantly what came into my mind of her saying that all the time. Like, oh, you need to do 10 minutes and then step out, And I'm like, no, you got to do it longer. Fedora Emelianenko lived in saunas, Do what he does. But that's, what you mentioned is gold. And I feel like I kind of like a little bit threw the medical community under the bus there, but I feel there's a reciprocal relationship between the customer and a doctor that's willing just to prescribe more and more and more without getting to the etiology. Because I feel like a lot of people too, I mentioned there are genuine people that want real healing and might be misled by, the pharmaceutical approach, but there's a exponentially larger community that doesn't want to look in the mirror and admit to themselves that they're causing all their own pain and problems, And they do seek out these kind of like false promises of, here, you got high blood pressure, take this blood pressure medication. Don't deal with the belief system that led to the behaviors that led to the high blood pressure. But I think what they're not getting also is that same belief system that led to the high blood pressure. Although, the blood pressure medication could lower a bit, but guess what? That same belief system would lead to a myriad of other health issues in a long enough time frame as well, not just the high blood pressure. And guess what? The high blood pressure medication, it doesn't cure or prevent your blood pressure either. It just kind of suppresses your symptoms and kind of numbs your body out. So it doesn't really cure you from that either. But some people do actually believe they've been cured for it if their numbers kind of go down because they've taken that medication. And I feel there's that. There's a community of people that don't want to admit that, like, hey, if you're, which I think is powerful, because I say this a lot and I get criticized for it sometimes. And I actually got it from a guy named Brian Carroll. If you're causing your own pain, that's great news, because you can stop causing your own pain then if you're doing it, which is powerful, but also puts the responsibility on you, which a lot of people aren't ready to deal with, especially when you consider when you take into consideration, let's say you got a computer programmer that's pushing 70, 80 hours living on junk food in a very high stressful environment, which computer science tends to be. You have to admit to yourself, like, hey, man, if I want to optimize my mental and physical health, I can't be working in this field like this anymore. And it's hard to come to that. And I know you probably face that in a few different aspects of your life too. The UFC, it's kind of like, after you had your jaw broken, orbital bone broken, after so many of those episodes, you're like, man, I can't continue to keep doing this. You know what I mean? And also optimize my mental and physical health. How do you feel? How tough was that to kind of put that aside, because it is kind of like you devoted a lot of time to it, which a lot of people devote to their jobs as well, et cetera, et cetera. I think at that point you already had kids, which a lot of people
No,
had.
not yet. Thankfully,
Like,
I don't think I could have done it with kids. Fighting, and I don't mean this in a bad way. It's a very selfish sport. The requirements are so high that anyone you date has to be all in support of you. And then I've obviously I got a lot of friends in the fight game who have fucking saints for wives, just amazing women who are mothers, and they get it and they say yes to that. But it is a massive requirement. My wife was super supportive of me when I was fighting, but understanding the time constraints, I didn't want to have kids while I was in there. I wanted to be more present with my kids, and nothing wrong with the fighters, who do have kids. They're great dads, but it's a long time to be away, and then in between it's just rest mode. Like, it's not like I go run and play with my kid in between jiu-jitsu and boxing. Like, I'm fucking flatlined depending on the workout, right? So but yeah, to your point, I retired at 32 years old in 2014, super young. A lot of guys in MMA can fight into their early 40s and do well doing that. There is a cost to that though, and I've probably received more brain damage in sparring than I ever did in the fighting. There was maybe a couple of fights like Glover Teixeira and Jimmy Manawa where I really got my bell rung. But outside of that, even with eye fractures and things like that, never felt concussed, never felt dinged, like the world didn't go black. I had a pretty strong chin. And that only lasts so long. Like Chuck Liddell used to walk through punches and kicks and pride and in the early days in the UFC. And then by the end, one punch can knock him out, just because that's what happens to all of us. And I understood that, that one thing that I understood when I got into fighting, because I had forcefully had to learn it in football, was it is a finite game. I don't get to do it the rest of my life. And my dad had told me that my whole football career. And it was like, fuck you, dude. I'm going as far as I can. I want to play pro. And sitting on the bench at ASU was a hard pill to swallow, because I knew there's zero chance of going pro now. Like absolutely zero chance. And also I really wanted to play at the collegiate level, Division I, and didn't get to. And, fighting gave me a doorway to continue refining myself and growing as a person outside of learning martial arts and those kind of things. And I'm a lifelong martial artist. I still train here and there. It's certainly not to the degree that I used to, but it wasn't hard for me to set fighting aside, because I had plant medicine journeys that had really expanded upon like who I was, like the identity that gets wrapped around with I'm a fighter, I'm looked at this way, this is who I am as a person, I'm a warrior, whatever the story is you're telling yourself, that wasn't there for me anymore. I had really just peeled so many layers back that it was like, oh, cool, this is what I'm doing right now, and I'll stop when I don't love it, and I still love it. Okay, I'm going to keep going a little bit, and it's like, well, there's that rule that I had. And now that I'm 4-5 in the UFC, I knew immediately, like, this is it. Many times early on, I'd be learning new things and think, I really want to take another stab at this, because I knew I was infinitely better as I had aged and settled down into my own skin after fighting than I was when I was fighting. And I had never really mastered the mental emotional aspects of that. And I was spending a lot of time mastering the mental emotional aspects of myself post fighting. So there was a lot I wanted to take back to that test, because that test is the ultimate test. Like, all right, I can get zen sitting outside with my feet in the pond. Can I get zen when somebody's trying to kick me in the face? Mm-hmm. And a part of me loves that type of challenge. It loves to say yes to that test. But, eventually the juice wasn't worth the squeeze. I realized that I had extracted 90% of the benefit, and really, I would be able to curtail 90% of the damage the earlier I got out. So that decision was relatively easy for me, and I didn't hold on to too much from there. And then, really it was just like, how can I scratch the itch of everything that I'm into? I was satisfying everything I wanted through learning and education via podcasts and books. And then really embodying that. Paul says, you can read every book on earth, but if you don't embody it, you're the smartest guy in the room who doesn't know shit. So like I took that to heart and really thought, like, I'm gonna walk a mile in these shoes and see if carnivore works. I'm gonna walk a mile in these shoes with Kelly Starrett and see if the mobility works. How does that change? Like doing a super couch stretch actually made my neck pain go away after having a broken neck. I was like, this is weird, but it makes sense because everything's interconnected. Mm-hmm. And, the more I grabbed things that worked for me, the more my life improved and the more I could share with others. And obviously having a podcast, there's a great deal of reason to continue that education and, really try things on for size. So I think with the transition from fighting, it was a lot easier than I thought it would be.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning into the podcast. I'm curious, have you ever been confused by the labels in the grocery store? In Yevgeny's book, he demystifies the difference between caged, cage-free, free-range, and pasture-raised meats. He also covers how to avoid GMOs, source high-quality water, fish, supplements, and other related topics. It's a beautifully illustrated, non-technical read that comes with a comprehensive video series and other extended learning materials. Jump on Amazon and check out the book titled Anti-Factory Farm Shopping Guide by Eugene Trufkin. Now let's dive back into the podcast.
Gotcha. Okay. This is I forgot to ask this one, but it kind of goes back a little bit to this topic, to the topic before we covered this one. But what's your take with, how's your experience with like the whole like COVID situation and stuff of that sort? Because I didn't get the vaccine, basically when COVID hits, I disappeared to Big Bear for like 2 weeks because that's how long it was going to last, in the media, it was like, oh, it's just 2 weeks to flatten the curve. Now it's already 2 years, but maybe it was a typo, just joking. They meant to write 2 years. Anyways, but I was there for like 8 months or so, 8 or 9 months. And I was just kind of like working out in the woods, doing a cold plunge in the creek after every workout. Bear Total Fitness. I love the owner of that gym. He kept it open the whole time. And he's like, fuck you guys, I'm not closing. So I got 2 or 3 workouts in there a week. Great gym if anyone is in that area. Totally love that place. But I would post about like my journey and just not posting saying like, don't get the vaccine or any of that sort, but just posting about my journey and the fact that I didn't even get sick. And I'll get so many people attacking me, that I'm like, dude, and the people attacking me, like you would look at their profile and it's like, dude, they're like 30, 40 pounds overweight, like totally full of disease and obviously a lot of mental pain because people don't look like that unless they have a lot of like internal pain that basically manifest themselves in that kind of appearance. And I was just like, dude, what the fuck is going on with this country? Like, why am I being criticized for just like actually like optimizing my health? And I think I know the answer to it. I have a theory for it, but I was just wondering your experience during the whole situation and kind of like how that all turned out.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things. I mean, one, I fall right alongside Paul Check in our viewpoint of it. I think there's a lot of nefarious bad actors that are driven by money and greed and ultimately power and control over humanity that are, I don't want to say, it's some kind of secret societies and things like that. Like, very well may be the case. I couldn't name them. I don't know about them. But just looking at the pharmaceutical industry, looking at how many patents were out before COVID hit, COVID-19 specific patents on vaccines long before this came out. The funding of gain of function research that is tied to Anthony Fauci. Like, if you read The Real Anthony Fauci by Bobby Kennedy, it will blow your fucking mind. And you can deny the facts all you want, but the facts are laid out very clearly in that book in a beautiful time specific, like it goes through the time lapse of the last 2 years and really dives into the science that we were supposed to trust or lack thereof. And, it's an expose. I think Mickey Willis is a friend of mine. He did the documentary series Plandemic. And most people, if you haven't seen that, are likely scratching your head like, this guy fucking watches conspiracy theory movies. And it's one thing. I just ask yourself, why didn't you watch it? If you haven't seen it, like, why didn't you watch it? It's because John Oliver told you on fucking HBO at 10 p.m. that it's a hoax. Like, watch it for yourself and see what's up. There's the second film in particular, Plandemic Indoctrination, is brilliant. I've had many of the people on my podcast and have found everything they've said to be 100% true and valuable. And, so at the end of the day, like, what do I do? And we've had, as far as social media and pushback, there's been a sea of people who, follow the narrative, but there's been also equal to that or more people who want to know the truth and people that are willing to think outside the box. And it's not surprising that you took that path because of the fact that most people who are into health and wellness and are into understanding our food, they've seen fuckery for decades. Mm-hmm. They've seen the FDA as a joke for decades. They've seen whatever government body is saying what makes something organic or not is a joke. It's a pay-to-play system, and corporations have been running the show for at least the last 100 years. The biggest guys in banking and oil put together the Federal Reserve. You can read The Creature on Jekyll Island by G. Edward Griffin. I mean, there's mountains of evidence that show that if it's planned or not, doesn't really matter. But at the end of the day, I mean, it would matter if we could find cut and clear evidence of the plan. But the point being that if you look at all the things going on with that, nobody's been talking about health. Nobody's been talking about what makes people healthy. You lock people indoors, tell people to wear masks that don't work, that make you sick. Nobody's talking about vitamin D3, zinc, quercetin, any of this stuff, hydroxychloroquine. And all this gets broken down in The Real Anthony Fauci. But yeah, I mean, I've got a pretty hard stance on that. I'm very happy we had made it to Texas ahead of time, coming out here 5 years ago. I count that as a serious blessing. And Texas handled it differently. I remember when Texas and Florida said they weren't going to lock everyone down again on this after we had been let out and they wanted to lock people down again. And I think our governor, who's got, plenty of pros and cons, Governor Abbott, he was like, we're not doing it. I'm not going to do that to local businesses. And I think we're healthy enough. Well, by everyone's standards, by California's standards, New York standards, like, we should have seen mass die off in Texas and Florida. We didn't. The UFC, who I used to fight for, has their pros and cons. There's things I like about it, things I don't. They went to Florida for their first live event, and then they came to Houston for their second live event right in that time. And these aren't the healthiest people. These aren't health conscious people like you and me that are in the stands. These are, overweight dudes and women drinking and spitting in each other's face while they're yelling at their favorite fighter. And nothing wrong with that. They support fighting, and I appreciate the support. None of them got sick. Like, they didn't see, like, there should have been millions of people, like, just spreading like wildfire. You got 20,000 people locked up in this tiny box together, and supposedly the outbreak is going through the roof, and it just didn't happen. So that can become something that's hindsight's 2020, right? We can look back on that and be like, why didn't these two entire states just fall? Because it's not what they say it is. It's not, it doesn't, I don't think that it doesn't exist. It for sure exists. And it is deadly to some people, but it's a very, very small percentage of people who have multiple comorbidities and high age and have not taken care of themselves their entire life. Does that mean We should just let them die off? No, we should figure out ways to keep them alive. And it should be things that circle back to foundational principles like how are you sleeping? What are you eating? What are you supplementing with? Do you have adequate levels of D3 and zinc in your diet and vitamin C? All of that shit matters, right? None of that was discussed by Fauci or any of these guys at the top. So that's a short rant on that. I had a Red Pill podcast. I did solo podcast on this. You can look it up on the Kyle Kingsbury podcast. I forget which number it is, but the Red Pill solo cast really breaks down a lot of this stuff and kind of how I came to this conclusion. Because I was like everybody else. And initially, I was camping with my son when the state parks and recs kicked everyone out. Texas State Parks and Rec kicked everyone out. They sent us home with like a $20 refund. And they're like, sorry, this shit's real. And we're like, okay. And I took it really serious. And then over time, especially watching how things unfolded, and you mentioned, I think there's like 8 to 12 food companies that control all the food in the world, right? There's 9 corporations that control all of media. You got 1,000+ channels on cable TV. It's coming from one of those 9. Million radio stations. It's coming from one of those 9. How easy is it to coordinate a narrative in which everyone's saying the same thing and telling you to do the same thing? It's pretty easy when there's only 9 people, right? Or 9 companies that control that. So again, that dips into the weeds around conspiracy a little bit and things like that. But at the end of the day, it's not a theory if it can be proven. And it is, people conspire to do stupid shit at the cost of the masses when the masses are sleeping. And that's clearly the case in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't think it's just your opinion. I think it's just fact most of the time. I'm just going to come out and say it. But it's kind of like so funny during the pandemic. I found, especially like on Facebook, they would have like that, oh, I got vaccinated kind of circular symbol you can get on your main profile picture. And it was just so funny. A lot of people were like bragging about getting vaccinated while taking a selfie of them at a fast food place being like 20 or 30 pounds overweight. I'm like, dude, you are completely missing the point, because once again, going back to like, okay, cool. Let's just say this vaccine like does work. Okay. All right, cool. It protects you from COVID. But hey, guess what? 50% of Americans develop cancer now within their lifetime, and half of them die from it. That's 25% chance of dying, basically 50% chance of developing cancer. And once you develop it, it kind of derails your life for quite a while too, even if you come out the other side of it successfully. You got to take that into consideration too. 1 out of 3 Americans die from heart attacks. Like here are the numbers actually. So you got 800,000 Americans dying from very super preventable heart attacks every single year. 800K every year on the year, and is just increasing. You got 650,000 Americans dying from cancer every year. You have 105,000 Americans dying from type 2 diabetes, which is mega preventable, even for through the most minor of lifestyle changes. You don't even need to go to the extreme like we are. You have 180,000 Americans dying from strokes every year. 130,000 Americans dying from properly prescribed medical drugs every single year. Can you imagine if like, the military lost 130,000 soldiers? What kind of an outcry that would be? You're losing that every single year. I don't see that on the freaking CNN. How come they're not blasting that number if public health is their real concern? Okay, public health is your concern. I want to hear these numbers every single damn day and a solution for it. Alcohol, 100,000 deaths every year. COVID, now it's at 1 million, supposedly. There's a lot of debate about how the numbers are drawn, but let's say it is truly 1 million deaths. Okay, cool. Guess what? 80 to 85% of those deaths were extremely preventable if just the person was metabolically healthy. So that would be 800,000 lives saved right there. Okay. And then the silly thing is sometimes on the media, they would go like, oh, see, this healthy person got COVID and died from it. Wait a minute. There are basically no more healthy Americans, like I mentioned in the beginning. Just look up the study Prevalence of Optimal Metabolic Health in American Adults on PubMed.gov. 9 out of 10 American adults are basically dead inside. Okay? What kind of healthy person are you talking about? These people are totally like either clueless or purposely misleading the public, or they're equally lost themselves. And then unfortunately, they're in a leadership position. So everyone following them is going to be equally lost too. But I just find it like so silly. And I find a lot of people that jumped on this like COVID bandwagon and try to force other people to do it through passing laws and stuff like that. They just don't want to, once again, they don't want to look in the mirror and create real change from themselves. Because if you're after real change, you would quickly see all this symptom management bullshit is bullshit. Majority of the time. There are no absolutes. There's a place and time for everything. But my issue is when you're using medicine and vaccines to mask poor lifestyle and nutritional choices. And moreover, remember the biggest virus of all is a belief system that leads to these poor behavioral patterns. Because just like a quote unquote real virus, ideas are spread from person to person as well, and they eventually kill the host. So trust me, bad ideas have killed more people in the history of humankind than anything else. Okay, so you have to take those ideas seriously, and unfortunately, like it goes back to the beginning of the show. Unfortunately, just society has become a swamp of mental pathology where these ideas are seen as normal ideas where they're fucking not. Just look at the average person, look in the mirror and just be honest with yourself for a second, okay? That haggard look, that huge fat accumulation in the chest and the midsection, that shitty blood work, those are all signs that your belief system isn't working to your advantage. And you need to change, like, of course, if you're thriving, why change? If you're genuinely, honestly thriving. But most people, and I could objectively prove it through these numbers I just listed here, and there are millions of other studies to prove my point, they're just not. So why not? Even if the change is hard, dude, living the way you're living now is hard. You know what I mean? And it's harder because you have to experience that shit every single day. Maybe you stop consciously perceiving it because you numbed yourself out for so long, but the pain is still there. So that kind of brings me to the next point. What eventually was the triggering point that motivated you to get out of the city, start distancing yourself from this disgusting cesspool of society, basically, and kind of move to your own thing and kind of establishing your own thing?
Yeah, I mean, it was a couple of different factors. I think first was just listening to Graham Hancock talk about, when the asteroid hits, like who are the people that live, or even the old quote from the Bible, the meek shall inherit the earth. Like really understanding what that looks like. It's, the people who live without electricity in the Amazon that know how to forage for their own food and can build huts out of grass and provide everything for themselves in a self-sustained environment. That's who carries the torch. Cities go down. I mean, I've read I've deep dived a lot of dirty shit in the last 2 years, and one of those would be, existential crisis and risk. There's a good book called 1 Second After. It talks about a nuclear warhead going off in the stratosphere. There's no nuclear fallout, but it effectively acts as an EMP and shuts off the entire grid in North America. So what happens 1 second after that goes down? And it, there's a series of those books. I've only read the first one, but another one, Survivors, written by James Wesley Rawls, who's I believe a special ops guy from the Army, is really big into prepping and things like that. Talks about how systemic inflammation inflammation is the inflation of the
inflation body. Causes inflammation.
Yeah. Stress, And so he wrote this book in 2012, and he was talking about how inflation will cause the end of the United States. It'll cause the end of the world, and in the way that we know it. Right, modern society is going to break down due to modern banking practices, and this is 80% of the money that's out right now is printed in the last 2 years. Gas prices are going up. When I got to Austin, it was $1.85 a gallon for gas. I left California. I was like, oh man, this is awesome. I'm getting a truck. Now they're $4 a gallon for regular, right? $4 a gallon in Texas. And that's scratching the tip of the iceberg when it comes to how much inflation is waiting. 80% of the dollars that are out right now came in the last 2 years. We haven't even begun to understand what this level of inflation is going to do to the economy. People have no fucking idea. And there's many ways to go about that. Do I buy gold and silver? Is that going to be worth anything in a barter economy? Is it going to come down to barter? Is it going to be centralized bank digital currency, and New World Order shit? There's tons of questions we don't have answers. Won't pretend to have answers to that right now. But just in looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, shelter, food and water, clothing, how can I optimize that? Is that as a dad, you're the provider, but you're also the protector. And really thinking about those things for my family, being in a city is not the place to be. It's just not. And I've thankfully through through my career have been able to really choose my own work, and I can do it anywhere. Like we're podcasting online right now. I meet up, I travel for Fit for Service 4 or 5 times a year, but that's basically it. So, this big drive started in the last 2 years. It started in seeing the deception and the misdirections from the mainstream media and the government, and really understanding what would sovereignty look like, what would, kind of making sure if grocery stores close, we don't die, that I don't watch my kids starve. And seeing that as a real possibility, not a far off possibility, but a very real possibility, started getting me thinking. And then also with work, Fit for Service, we do a lot of stuff online. We've got weekly Q&As, things like that. But the juice is meeting up. It's in the festival. It's in the summit where we go and you've got 150 people doing breath work or ecstatic dance. It's in that interactions when you go through a challenging thing together where you come out the other side with true community. You come out with brothers and sisters in arms. And seeing how the world reacted to that, where they just shut everything down. You couldn't, even in places like Arizona, which were pretty cool, we couldn't meet somewhere with more than 20 people. Maskless, maskless still, but no more than 20 people. It's like, that's not going to work for what we do. And so I really got in Aubrey's ear, who's, my best friend. I was like, we got to buy land here. We got to buy land in Texas. He's already got the ranch in Sedona. If we can get something in Florida, but we need places where we can still bring people in and have these face-to-face gatherings where people, 2020, we had 3 events that year. We had to move our summer event around because of lockdowns. We ended up going to Nevada, and it was cool. Sedona happened in October. In October, that was the first time a large percentage of attendees had hugged someone the entire year, or at least since February. Think about that. 8 months had gone by since they had a human interaction where they touched another person. That is insane to me. You look at kids going to school with masks, they can never read the facial expression. They can't tell if their teacher's smiling or crying. Like, the impact of that. We have no idea what the ramifications of that are going to be. So thinking about that, how do I reverse engineer something where we really are protecting ourselves against what society imposes, what's the new mandate when monkeypox gets spread or whatever the fuck they're pushing these days. How do we make sure we have a gathering space that's big enough to hold people? How do we make sure that we can be food sovereign where we can actually start to practice and change? People are like, there's many ways to change. I've listened to many different people talk about all that's wrong in the world, and it's daunting, but you don't have to be an expert in everything. You just do the thing you're passionate about. If you're passionate about cleaning the ocean, that's what you get passionate about. Do something about it. If you're passionate about changing the way we do finance and centralized banking, then start to change that. Work in crypto, work in different ways, work in barter, and figure out alternative systems that can coincide, right? There's a great book called Power for the People by Pavlov Havel, who, I want to say he was from Ukraine. I could be wrong, but he went to jail during Soviet occupation, and I think when Stalin was in, he got out and became the president of the country. And he talked about how farmers did it was through running a parallel gray market economy all throughout, right? So that's how they continue to survive. The community is what helped them survive, right? Providing for themselves. There's a great guy that I've been following named Ice Age Farmer on YouTube. Mm-hmm. And Ice Age Farmer has been diving deep into this stuff. We talk about all the meat processing plants going up in flames in the last 2 years in North America.
What was that all about? I remember hearing that.
well, think about this. No one says it either. No, everybody's like, the 11th meat processing plant went up in flames. Previously, there's only, maybe 1 or 2 a year that would happen. And almost unequivocally, all of them were caused by fire, arson. Somebody fucking lit it on fire, right? Nobody's connecting those dots as they report how many are good. It's like, dude, it's a no-brainer. People are setting the shit on fire. And so, again, when you think about, is it conspiracy or are they manufacturing supply chain issues? They're manufacturing supply chain issues. The World Economic Forum, the people who are in control, who have seated, the Prime Minister of France and Justin Trudeau down in Canada, they've put people in power in all the global powers. That's it right there. It doesn't need to be the Illuminati or any of this other shit or fucking reptilian beings. We know there are people that have been handpicked and put in place, and their policies are dictating this stuff. The policies are why farmers in the Netherlands are on strike. It's undeniable, and they're getting shot, by force. They're getting shot with guns, and they're peacefully protesting. Like, when you start to see this stuff, hopefully places like America will start to slowly gravitate and understand what's happening in the world that's not being communicated through mainstream media, and put two and two together. And with that, the more we do now that's preventative, the more bulletproof we become and sovereign we become as farmers, or at least knowing our farmers, knowing where we can go direct for food. If I wasn't farming right now, I'd still be driving to Rome Ranch 90 minutes to pick up my eggs, because they're the best quality eggs I can get. And I'll buy a quarter leg of a bison. And if I need to go halves on a whole bison with somebody, or quarters with other friends and family, I'll do that. So I get the best meat in my freezers. And we got solar, and we got battery, Tesla power walls. So if the grid goes down, we're fine. I don't have to worry about my 2-year-old sweating to death. All of these things matter. And yes, stuff costs money. Great food costs money. But really, what is my priority? My priority is my health and the health of my family, and the ability for us to continue on without top-down control. There's a number of things I'd better do. And so those were the biggest driving factors for me in wanting to acquire land and steward the land. And, after Onnit sold, Aubrey bought the land for fit for service and for church purposes. And I've been stewarding the land ever since. We brought in Chad Johnson, who's a Sepp Holzer understudy. If people want to get into understanding this stuff, Sepp wrote a book called Desert or Paradise. It's out of print. It's like $100 if you want to buy it, but it's worth every penny. He was setting up oases in the Saharan desert. Mm-hmm. His farm is in northern Austria in the Alps. It's like 6,000 feet elevation. There's frost on the ground 6 months out of the year, and he's growing lemons. He's growing lemons not in a greenhouse. He's growing them outdoors, right? This guy's doing amazing things by first restoring hydrological balance, waterways, working with the land, working with the elements, and then creating its entire own ecosystem. And within that, subdivisions of the ecosystem where you can grow a wide variety of plants and vegetables. And he also wrote his Sepp Holzer's Permaculture. He's just a phenomenal guy, and I get to learn directly from one of his apprentices. We don't get to learn from Bruce Lee, but if you go train with Dan Inosanto, it's pretty damn close, mm-hmm. right? He's 1 degree of separation away from the master, and he's a master in his own right. And I think, Chad Johnson is phenomenal. He's a master. We're going to be running education at our farm as well all next year for people, building out a root cellar and having a class on that. We're going to be building out or doing field harvests with one of the best guys in Texas for that, a student named Jared Holmes, and how to make your own pemmican, like a Native American, 100% biodynamic pemmican that'll last 18 to 24 months in a root cellar.
What's
right? So say again?
What's that? What's a pemmican?
Pemmican is like old school beef jerky. Right.
Oh,
so it's dehydrated meat, usually with bison, but you can do it with any animal. We've got red stag on the land, black buck. He's got recipes for all that. So I'll be learning this stuff first from him. We will be opening it up to the public. And that's the shit I'm excited about. If I kill an animal and there's no refrigeration, how do I process this animal in which time of year do I process this animal to make sure that we have a steady food supply for the next year? And I don't just eat 2 steaks and the thing rots. This is super important stuff for me, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Gorge like the emus do.
Can your solar panels 100% sustain you, including the refrigerator systems, or do you need a bigger setup?
I'm gonna add some. I have 13 panels, and we run a lot of juice here. We've got like a 240 volt sauna, hot rock finish sauna, and a number of other things. So I think just to be safe, we have got three stand-up freezers because they take less of a footprint. They're only like $600, and we've got a whole steer somewhere in there. We're giving away meat. We have so much frozen meat, but as a regenerative steer, spent the entire life and was processed on the same farm about an hour east of us here in Texas. And thankfully, Texas is loaded with regenerative farmers and mm-hmm. people that are really open to this type of work. And it's been, I think, one of the coolest things, when I got into this, I was like, yeah, I've been a fan of this. I've been buying this, but I don't know what's necessary. And it's daunting how much information there is, and what would be required of me to do this well. And, I had a couple medicine journeys last year that really just said the same thing over and over again. There is no 6 degrees of separation. There's only 1 degree of separation. If we are one as a people in a cosmos, then I'm connected by one relationship to any expert that I need. And that, as I've really let that soak in and come to understand it and know it for myself, where it's no longer an idea, but I viscerally know it. It's become gnosis, Gnosis. That has proved again and again, through the connection points that I have. And I think as people come to realize that for themselves, whether through plant medicine or meditation or just understanding, a lot of the great mystical teachings of the East, that is the case. And when you embody that, that's what gets mirrored back to you. So I've let go of a lot of fear having kids around what the world looks like in 10 years, 20 years. And at the same time, it does get worse before it gets better. So I approach it with the same mentality that I have with my health. Say yes to the challenge, lean into it, and do whatever's necessary in this moment so that tomorrow's better.
Well, what's your goal with your ranch? Like, what does the next 5 or 10 years of build out look like for you? And also, have you calculated? Is one of your goals to be 100% self sustaining with your food as well? And have you
Absolutely.
calculated how much you need for your kids, your wife, and yourself?
No, I haven't gotten into the prepper stuff when it comes to that, but we put 1,000 plants in the ground in March. We have 400 fruit and nut trees. We've got, 60 grapevines, blackberries, raspberries, a variety of nuts. And, and we're keeping bees. We've got 5 steer on the land. We're bringing in dairy cows next. We're going to get 50 sheep from the best sheep herder in Texas, who did the same thing you were talking about. He's systematically bred. If the sheep gave birth and didn't take care of its kid, he'd eat her. If it needed to get its hoof fixed more than once, he'd eat that one. And he just kept doing that over 15 years until he was left with bulletproof goats and bulletproof sheep. And so we're going to be bringing them on, and we've got a few emus, we've got 3 donkeys, and just of the widest variety. That'll continue to expand. We have 36 hens. We're going to put 10 ducks on the land as well, and a couple geese. So that expansion is going to there's a lot of changes and twists and turns that'll take place over the next few years, and more than I can mention right now. I'm sure I'll learn a lot when I head out to Virginia for the Robinia Institute to get educated. But yeah, food sovereignty, that's a huge one. And not just for me and my family, but for 40 people, probably. Can we produce enough food that can sustain 40 people throughout the year? And then how do we manage that? How do we take the entire crop and turn it into something? So you can't preserve raspberries. Do I freeze them? Do I freeze dry them? Do I turn it into some type of jam with pectin and our local honey that we're making right on the farm? What are the ways in which I want to preserve those? How long will that last in the root cellar? All this stuff is a part of the education right now that I'm learning alongside a pretty cool and robust team. So thankfully, it's not a one-man job. I don't think with juggling, being a husband, a parent, or dad of 2 kids, and podcasting and being a coach in fit for service that I'd have, enough time to truly devote for that. But I do make time for that because I understand its importance, not only for a potential risky future, but to hedge that future is important. But at the same time, this is what I'd want to do, even if the world was going to be peachy keen. This is having that connection to the land. And that's one of the greatest teachings that plant medicine has taught me is, what Native Americans called animism. Whatever's animating me, whatever soul I have that's beyond this body, that makes me more than a body, it's in everything. It's in the plants, it's in the trees, it's in the medicine, it's in all of it. And when I can connect to that on a day, I can't do plant medicines every day. Even if you could, I wouldn't. I can connect to that part of nature every single day, and I can have a hand in watching, something visceral. When your kids plant a tree and they watch that thing grow and it finally fruits in 2 or 3 years, that's a special moment. It's a special moment because you've watched that time lapse. You've cared for that thing with water and Microlife makes these really good organic soil amendments from bat poop and a bunch of other stuff that are slow release and don't burn the plants. And so just laying that out handful by handful, getting our hands dirty, getting it in the shit, I think has been a really powerful thing to be able to teach my kids and go through with them together.
How do they just do homeschooling, or do you? They do
Yeah,
homeschool.
we had our son at Waldorf in Austin, and uh, they decided for no apparent reason to follow CDC guidelines, which flew right in the face of everything Steiner taught. And
Hmm.
I don't think most people realized it. They had heard of Waldorf as a name, likely had never even heard of Rudolf Steiner. So a lot of parents were on board. Thankfully, a lot of the teachers weren't, and a lot of the parents weren't as well. So they created an offshoot, and we had our son in that school for a year. It was very good. It was a little bit of a drive, about 40 minutes east or west rather, and because of the Waldorf style, they do kindergarten for 3 years, 4, 5, and 6. And there's a big point to that, right? The kids 2 grades ahead of you, the kids 2 grades behind you, but you also get to be the rookie, the middle kid, and then you get to be the leader, right? And I think that's a super important thing, is that it's not just hanging out with kids your age, it's knowing the kids above you and below you and how to interact with them. And I really appreciated that. But he would have been back in kindergarten for his third year, and we said, now's the best time. My wife was homeschooled up until high school. um, Super smart, went to college at NAU and ran cross country there. And she said, yeah, this is the year we try it. And it was really hard the first few months. I mean, it was really hard having, having the kids around all day long, especially with our little one coming right behind him. And, but now that we have that down, like we get him violin practice once a week, with a really good violin coach. He absolutely loves it. He played the Star Spangled Banner on 4th of July, without missing a beat. I mean, he was great at that. And we take him to jiu-jitsu and Muay Thai, so he's getting physical outlets. And then most of the day, though, it's about expressing himself. It's about play, dance. It's about being in nature. And I think those are some of the most important pieces. And yeah, he's got hooked on phonics and different things for some of the baseline things that all kids need to know. But it's really been an unschooling process just as much as it's been a homeschooling process. And I continue to learn in that department as well. But he's thriving. Our kids have never been vaccinated. They don't get sick. When they get sick, they don't need antibiotics. They don't need over-the-counter medicine. They run a fever for a few days, and then it kicks it. Whatever needs to come out comes out. They heal naturally. And that's a testament in and of itself, because it's all the things. It's not just what we feed them. It's when their bedtime is, how much screen time they get. It's all those things. How much time are they outdoors? Do they experience really hot summers and really cold winters? Yeah. And we're not just leaving them in air conditioning all summer long. Like, they're constantly outdoors and getting it, and being around all the plants and animals has really been a benefit as well. There's tons of science on that, but um, I see so much of what we're doing right now as just in its infancy.
Hmm.
And where it'll be in 10 years and then in 30 years is just beyond what I can comprehend. But even right now, it's been such a beautiful thing to be a part of. I can't imagine not having that at this stage of my life. Like, it is the thing that I'm most excited about. And that's the excitement that I'll ride to read several books and study with different people, because it's necessary. It's an entirely new education that I haven't been a part of in the past that I need to onboard now.
Yeah. I feel especially in like Western cultures, like health and wellness has been so like overly complicated. Like people think it has to be complicated to be legit, you know? And I always say like, man, I've learned pretty much all of my health information from my grandmother that was like illiterate. And I know that that kind of sounds weird, but it's like, man, like that's actually where I learned about real food, about like all the things you talked about, being out in nature, taking care of yourself, working with nature instead of having nature work for you, et cetera, et cetera. And like I mentioned, she like basically didn't even go to the doctors her whole entire life, and she lived to be 87 in like amazing health. And more importantly, like she's at mental peace, never it's kind of tough to run into people like that, you know what I mean? She was able to achieve that. And I think that's why Paul Chek's message really resonated me, although he explains things a lot more academically than my grandmother did. But she really just stressed a lot of those basic principles, just because the environment kind of just forces you to live that way just automatically anyways, which is kind of my whole point about like, dude, it just becomes so easy, if you just step out of the swamp to actually achieve your health and stuff of that sort. Of course, keep in mind that wherever you go, there you are. So if you're the one that's creating your problems, you want to make sure to be honest with that and address that, because if you even step outside of the swamp, you'll tend to recreate those problems in that new environment too. So there's that important aspect. Being a parent, Kyle, does it kind of hurt you sometimes to see like the way kids are raised these days, given the fact that almost 50% are like 40 to 50% are obese basically? before they're even 10? Does it kind of like, and sometimes a lot of those people would look at you and they're like, oh, this guy's like a cuckoo guy, you know? Like that's not how you're supposed to live. Meanwhile, like your kids are all energetic and happy and healthy and you're energetic and they're like basically dying and need like multiple pharmaceutical drugs just to get up in the morning and be able to go to work. But in their mind's eye, they're like, you're kind of like quote unquote like, or guys like me are kind of like quote unquote like the quacks, you know? It's like, oh,
Yeah.
they don't know more than these medical doctors. These medical doctors are putting me on these drugs because they went to school for so long and they must know what they're talking about, you know? I feel
Yeah.
like that's an obstacle, and it's kind of like I always kind of like hate that.
Well, I mean, the way to let that go, because that used to bother me a lot too, is just the fact that they have to want it for themselves until they get to that point where they realize, like, Russell Brand talked about this when he had Jordan Peterson on his podcast. I think the second or third time. It was right after Peterson had just written 12 Rules for Life, and they compared it to the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous or any sobriety program. But one of the things they said is the first step is you must realize there's a problem. You have to admit there's a problem with your life that you don't have the wherewithal to fix. Then you seek the knowledge from a higher power. That could be God, that could be a book, it could be a mentor. Whatever the case is, you say, I don't have everything I need to figure out this problem. I'm going to turn to something else, right? And so most people do turn to the doctor first, but when that doesn't work or they're just doing patchwork for long enough, they're just trying to fucking hold on to the way they used to feel, and it's slowly slipping through until they no longer feel that way, and now they're trying to hold on to how they felt a year ago, which is not good. It takes really getting honest with yourself. Like Paul says, stop bullshitting with yourself. Stop bullshitting about what's in your pantry. Stop bullshitting about what time you go to bed or how much TV you watch. Stop bullshitting yourself. That's when when you're really honest and you have radical truth and honesty with yourself, that's when you can start to see the awareness starts to expand. And then you might say, maybe this guy is not the person I need to go see. Right? Maybe it is somebody else. Maybe I should listen to this podcast and try what they're saying, or read this book and try what they're delivering in that and see how that feels. Let me try it on for size. If it feels right and I start to feel better, what does that do for me? Right? Because the thing that I'm doing isn't doing what I want it to do, right? That is the definition of insanity, as Einstein put it, right? We have many people doing the same shit day in, day out, expecting a different outcome, and that's never going to come, you know? So I let go of the bothering, you know, and it is harder with kids as a parent, especially like, you know, even this year we'll go to a park in downtown Austin and they'll bus in a bunch of kids from school and all of them wearing masks. Like, we're fucking outdoors. We're in Texas. Like, what's going on? Like, we're all good. Y'all are the least, they should be the least worried about it. It's not a team of elderly folks that are over 70 with comorbidities that came in from the nursing home. Mm-hmm. Y'all are kids. Like, why are we doing this? And, you know, that's a harder thing to let go of. But ultimately, if, you know, we have some choice in our incarnation and potentially even choose our parents, you know, the choice to go down one rabbit hole only to pull ourselves back out for self-realization might be that, you know, and I don't want to take that away from people. So, and it may be a multi-life thing where you go through this entire life never quite getting it. You die early from some shitty disease and you repeat that a couple more times, then you understand health. Then you get to have the rebound and the comeback. And then it's lifetimes worth of pain and suffering to get to the point of bliss and understanding. And, you know, that's not up for me to decide. Ultimately, we all have those choices. Do we have free will or not? You know, and I think, unfortunately, our free will is dictated by how much indoctrination we have. What is our cultural upbringing? What is the baggage that we're clearing? You know, just the amount of imprint we've taken on from society and our peers and our teachers and the TV and everything that's there. If we can start to discard that, plant medicines have been huge for me in discarding that, then that can give us the doorway to search in new areas. You know, and the beautiful thing about that is there's a lot of people searching in new areas, and they've got it. They've got access to podcasts. They've got access to the YouTube channels, at least for now.
Yeah, I was just going to say that.
YouTube is policing the hell out of people. But for some reason, my buddy JP Sears is still on. So I think that's an important piece that we do have access, at least in this moment, to, you know, real wisdom that can change our lives for the better. And if we say yes to that, then we know it for ourselves, you know, and then it's no longer a debate. I know what health is because I'm healthy. I know what health is because I was not healthy and I clawed my way back to health. And now I'm healthier than I've ever been before because I've been able to learn from the masters like Paul and a whole host of other people and apply that to my own living experience. There's no dude in a white lab coat that's going to come on TV and tell me otherwise. Mm-hmm. That's it. I know it for myself. It's undeniable.
Well, the funny thing is, you mentioned this is rewinding way back, but during COVID, there was no talk about like being healthy and taking care of your health and all that stuff. Actually, there's a long video. I forgot who it was, but of Dr. Fauci being interviewed by some guy on the news. And it was a pretty hefty video. But at the end, the guy was asking, well, if there's a dangerous, this is way before COVID, of course. He's like, well, if there's a dangerous virus that came around, like, what do I do, Dr. Fauci? Do I wear a mask? Do I get all these medicines and this? He's like, no, let's not be crazy here. Okay. Do the stuff that's been proven to work forever. Make sure you're sleeping well. Make sure you're working out daily. Make sure you're eating well, and he's like, oh, you got like a few pounds to lose. Make sure you lose those pounds too. Yeah, it was just kind of funny, how the tune changed in like 2 years. I think it was like 2017 or something. I got to send you the video. But it's like, that's another thing, man. I used to post that video when people were saying like, no, you're crazy. You should get the vaccine and stop promoting your healthy lifestyle. I post that video. I'm like, I'm just following this guy's advice, basically, and they're totally ignore it. Anyways, I always say like sick people can't make healthy decisions or they wouldn't be sick to begin with. So there's that aspect also. So they can kind of like continue to live the way they live. It's really paying off for them. So Kyle, thank you for being a guest on the show. Are there any other topics you would like to discuss or cover? I'm happy to cover whatever. So
no, I think we hit it all, brother. That was fantastic. I appreciate you having me on.
Okay, thank you. And it's great to chat. It took me 2 years to reach out to you, but better late than never, So
better late than never, brother. I hope I get to run into you at some point.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Eugene.
Thanks for tuning into the podcast. If you've ever had trouble losing weight, or you've lost weight, but still didn't have the ideal body or health you're aiming for, please feel free to reach out anytime and book an assessment. Eugene will work with you to cover your goals in detail, see what's holding you back, and go from there. In the meantime, feel free to check out the countless testimonials on Eugene's website in the link below. In the testimonial section, you'll notice everyone has various backgrounds, are of all different ages, and all have had different challenges in their life, but they all have one thing in common: they were all able to find their health and achieve their ideal body. You're also welcome to add yourself to the Facebook group in the link below. There you'll have access to the live videos that Eugene does weekly on Sundays, and other helpful content. Thank you again for tuning in.